I've gone camping a lot in my life, mostly short trips, 2 or 3 nights, usually with a group. This story happened a few years ago during a weekend trip that was supposed to be simple, just me and one friend. No big plans or hiking goals, just getting away from work and noise. We arrived in the afternoon. The campground was small, tucked back in the woods and mostly empty. That didn't surprise us. It was late in the season and the weather had already started turning cold. There were a couple of cars parked far off near the entrance, but we didn't see anyone around when we pulled in. We picked a spot close to the tree line, open enough to see the sky, close enough to the woods to block some wind. Everything felt normal. We set up the tent, started a fire, cooked and talked like we always did. When the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast. The campground got quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful, just empty, like sound had somewhere else to be. My friend went to sleep early. I stayed up by the fire, scrolling on my phone, staring into the woods more than I realized. The fire lit up maybe 20 feet ahead. Beyond that, it was just dark shapes between trees. That's when I noticed something that didn't move the way shadows usually do. Deep in the woods, there was a tall shape. At first, I thought it was a tree. Then I noticed the outline didn't quite match the others around it. I stared at it longer, waiting for it to shift. It didn't move. Eventually, I told myself it was nothing, just the dark messing with depth. I put out the fire and went into the tent. I fell asleep faster than I expected. Around midnight, I woke up cold, the kind of cold that wakes you without a reason. The tent was quiet. I checked my phone just after 2 a.m. I was about to roll over when I noticed the tent wall on my side was pushed in slightly, not collapsing, just pressed, like something had leaned against it and stepped away. I sat up and listened. After a minute, I lay back down. I told myself it was wind or an animal brushing past. Still, I stayed awake longer than usual, listening, counting breaths, waiting for something else. The next morning, my friend said something that stuck with me. He said he thought I had walked around the campsite during the night. He heard footsteps, slow ones, going around the tent. I told him I hadn't gotten up. We laughed it off, but when we stepped outside, I noticed footprints near the fire pit. Boot prints, more than one set. They came close to the tent, close enough that whoever made them would have been standing right beside us while we slept. We talked about leaving early. We didn't want to admit we were scared over something we couldn't explain. That afternoon, we went hiking. A few miles in, we saw something off the trail. About 10 feet into the trees, there was a stack of rocks, carefully placed, balanced. Not a trail marker, not random. Neither of us touched it. When we got back to camp, our cooler had been moved, just a few feet. Nothing missing, the lid still shut. That night, we kept the fire going longer. We sat facing the woods, talking quieter than before. Around midnight, as the fire burned low, we both saw it. Between two trees, maybe 30 feet out, someone was standing there. We couldn't see details, just a silhouette. My friend asked if they needed help. After a few seconds, the figure stepped backward into the trees. We didn't sleep that night. Sometime before morning, I heard breathing outside the tent, close enough to know it wasn't an animal. I stayed still until it faded. When the sun came up, we finally left the tent. That's when we saw it. There was a piece of paper tucked under a rock near the fire pit. Inside, written in uneven handwriting, were just a few words. You were not alone. Around the campsites, carved in trees and scratched in dirt, were symbols. Simple shapes, circles, lines, repeated again and again. Near the edge of the tree line, we found a small dead animal, carefully placed. That was enough. We packed as fast as we could and got in the car. By the time I made it back home, I decided I wouldn't even bother telling anyone. The thing that freaks me out the most is what would have happened if we stayed another night. I still go camping now, but I don't camp alone. This happened to me in the summer of 2019, a year before the world changed and before people started paying more attention to what it really meant to be alone. At the time, I did a lot of solo camping. Not because I thought of myself as brave or outdoorsy, but because it was cheap and quiet. I worked a job that drained me mentally. Every week felt the same. Constant noise of phones ringing and people talking. Going out into the woods for a few days felt like resetting something in my head. I usually camped on public land, no campgrounds or reservations, just Forest Service roads and clearings you had to find yourself. I followed the rules, stayed in legal areas, but beyond that, I didn't care where I ended up, as long as it was isolated. This trip wasn't planned. I finished work on a Friday afternoon, went home, threw my gear into the back of my SUV, and started driving north toward a section of state forest I'd visited once before. I remembered it being quiet, deep woods, lots of dirt roads that went longer than you'd expect. It took about 3 hours to get there. By the time I turned off the highway and onto gravel, the sun was already dropping. The forest closed in on both sides of the road. Tall trees blocked most of the light, and the shadows felt thicker the farther I drove. I rolled my windows down a bit, listening to the tires crunch over the gravel. I didn't pass a single vehicle. After about 20 minutes, I spotted a narrow pull-off, no sign or marker, just a flattened patch of ground tucked between the trees. It looked like someone had used it before. I parked and shut off the engine. The silence hit immediately. Just the faint sound of wind moving through the tops of the trees. I sat there longer than I meant to, hands still on the steering wheel, listening. Something about the place felt wrong. I'd felt that way before. Being alone makes your brain fill in gaps that don't need filling. I shook it off. I got out and started unloading my gear. Tent first, sleeping bag, food. That's when I noticed the fire ring. It wasn't unusual on its own, but it looked fresh. The stones were neatly arranged. The ash inside hadn't been scattered by rain or wind. Someone had been there recently. That bothered me more than it should have. I hadn't seen any other cars, no fresh tracks on the road, and this wasn't a popular area. Still, I told myself someone had probably camped there earlier in the week. I set up my tent, cooked dinner on my stove, and ate as the forest slowly darkened. The temperature dropped, shadows stretched between the trees, and it stayed quiet. By the time night settled in, there still weren't any bugs, no crickets, no distant animal sounds. I started a small fire mostly for comfort. The flame gave the clearing some shape, pushed back the darkness just enough to make it feel manageable. Around 10 p.m., I noticed movement at the edge of the firelight. I looked up. Nothing was there. Probably a deer, I told myself. Still, I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the trees. Nothing moved. I went back to the fire, but the feeling didn't leave. It felt like something was just outside the light, staying perfectly still. Eventually, I put the fire out and crawled into my tent. I lay there, listening. That's when I heard footsteps. They were slow. Whoever it was stayed just outside the clearing. The footsteps stopped near the front of my tent. A shadow passed over the fabric, blocking the faint moonlight. I cleared my throat, said, "Hey." No response. The shadow moved away. I listened as the footsteps faded into the woods. I didn't sleep much after that. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke suddenly to something so close it made my chest tighten. Breathing. Right outside my tent. I turned on my flashlight. The beam pressed against the fabric. The wall bulged inward slightly, like someone was leaning on it. I yelled, louder this time. The pressure vanished instantly. I heard running. Branches snapped. Leaves exploded underfoot as whoever it was tore through the forest. I sat there, shaking until the sky started to lighten. When morning came, I stepped outside. Footprints were everywhere. Fresh ones. They circled my tent multiple times. One set stopped right beside where my head had been. I packed up and left without eating. As I drove out, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. Another campsite, about 100 yards down the road. And it wasn't empty. Someone had been there the whole time. When I finally reached my place, I thought that was the end of it.
A month later, I tried camping again. Different forest, different area. I told myself I wasn't going to let one bad experience ruin something I enjoyed. That night, I set up just before dark. Everything felt normal. I relaxed, made dinner, sat by the fire. Then I heard it. A scream. It sounded like a woman, but stretched. It echoed through the woods, long and uneven, like someone forcing sound out of lungs that didn't quite work. I froze. The scream didn't fade into the distance like sound normally does. It ran, cutting through the woods. Heavy footsteps tore through the trees, circling fast. Then something hit my tent hard. The fabric shook violently, like someone had grabbed it with both hands and thrown their weight against it. I yelled after the shaking stopped. Everything was silence. Just nothing. I didn't sleep at all that night. At first light, I found deep hand impressions in the dirt around my tent. I packed up and drove straight home. I don't camp alone anymore. And when I hear people say the woods are peaceful, I know they've never heard something scream from the dark. Not like that.
When I was around 16, my best friend Ryan and I went on what was supposed to be a simple overnight camping trip in a state forest about 2 hours from where we lived. It wasn't our first time camping. We'd gone plenty of times with our families and a couple times just the two of us at more established campgrounds, places with numbered sites, bathrooms, other people around. This time though, we wanted something quieter, something more remote. Ryan's dad suggested a spot he used to fish near when he was younger. It wasn't an official campground, just a clearing near a river, technically still public land. He told us it was rarely visited, and as long as we were respectful and packed out our trash, nobody would bother us. We got there late afternoon, maybe around 4. The drive itself felt longer than it should have. Once we turned off the main road, the pavement disappeared almost immediately. The rest of the way was just dirt and gravel, winding deeper into the forest. The trees grew taller and closer together the farther we went, their branches blocking out chunks of sunlight even though it was still broad daylight. When we finally parked and stepped out of the car, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it felt. No birds or insects, just the sound of the river somewhere in the distance, steady and constant. Still, we shrugged it off. We were teenagers, excited to be out on our own, and neither of us wanted to be the first to say something felt wrong. We picked a flat spot near the center of the clearing and started setting up camp. The river was about 50 yards away. We couldn't see it through the trees, but we could hear it clearly. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped faster than we expected. We ate dinner by the fire, joked around, told dumb stories, the usual stuff. For a while, everything felt normal. Around 9, Ryan went back to the car to grab extra batteries for the lantern. He was gone longer than expected, long enough that I stood up and started looking down the trail, wondering what was taking him so long. When he came back, he looked confused. He asked me if I'd walked past the car while he was there. I told him no, I hadn't left the clearing. He said that while he was digging through the trunk, he heard footsteps on the dirt road behind him. He assumed it was me messing with him until he turned around and saw nobody there. We laughed it off, blamed animals, tried to make it a joke, but after that, neither of us stayed far from the fire. By 10, the flames were dying down and the forest beyond the clearing felt darker. That's when we noticed something near the edge of the clearing. There were sticks laid out on the ground. Not scattered, not broken randomly. Arranged. They formed a rough circle, maybe 6 feet across. The sticks were similar in size, placed end to end, like someone had taken their time with it. Neither of us remembered seeing it earlier. We were both sure we would have noticed. Ryan joked that maybe someone else had camped there recently and left it behind. His voice didn't sound confident. We kicked the sticks apart, scattered them with our feet, and went into the tent. That night, sometime after midnight, I woke up to movement outside. The sound of footsteps. Running. I held my breath and listened. The steps circled the tent once, then stopped. I whispered Ryan's name. He didn't answer, but I knew he was awake. That's when we heard the humming. It was low, almost calm, like someone humming to themselves. It didn't come from one direction.
It drifted slowly around the tent. The sound moved closer. The fabric beside my head pressed inward slightly like something brushing against it. Not enough to tear it, just enough to let us know it was there. Neither of us moved. After what felt like a very long time, the humming stopped. The footsteps moved away, slow and careful, back to the trees. Eventually, exhaustion won. I don't remember falling asleep. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to complete darkness. At first, I thought it was still night. Then I checked my phone. It was almost 7 in the morning. That didn't make sense. The sun should have been up. Light should have been coming through the tent walls. Instead, everything was dim, muted, like the forest itself was blocking it. My head hurt. Ryan looked worse, pale, disoriented. Neither of us remembered sleeping. We crawled out of the tent and immediately saw the sticks. The circle was rebuilt and closer to the tent than before. This time, there were footprints around it, adult-sized, pressed deep into the dirt, as if whoever made them had been standing there for a long time. That's when we heard a single, massive bang. It didn't come from one direction, it came from everywhere. The ground beneath us vibrated slightly, like something heavy had struck the earth. Whatever it was moving around the clearing too fast. The bangs came in irregular bursts, circling us, cutting through the trees with a force that didn't sound human. We heard sounds with it. Ryan grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the car. Before we made it 10 steps, something slammed into the ground nearby. The impact sent dirt and leaves spraying into the air. Then everything went white. I woke up sitting against the car door. Ryan was on the ground a few feet away, staring at the trees like he was trying to understand where he was. The forest was quiet again. We just packed what we could and left. On the drive home, Ryan finally told me the rest of what happened the night before. When he'd gone to the car, he didn't just hear footsteps. He heard someone whisper his name, right behind him. We don't like thinking about what happened that night. It feels like a bad dream. And to this day, we've never gone back to that forest.